everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leaders Show, where I have a fireside chat with handpicked leaders from the payments industry. They share how the people element and how creating a winning culture is based upon a human centerpiece, and where they embrace challenges. However, first of all, before the challenges, they look at the opportunities. Now, one of the greatest challenges that I've observed is building a culture which allows people to reach their potential whilst maintaining the consistent uptime of technology on a mission critical gateway and technology. Now, one of the most accomplished people I've seen firsthand is Martijn van Os. Martijn, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Adrian. Thank you very much for having me on.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. So Martijn is an SVP at Mastercard Payment Gateway Services. His focus is on aligning his team to customer need, leading with a very strategic program vision. Growth is always achieved by creating a people-centered culture. He's not only one of the most strategic people I know, he's also an exceptional relationship builder and thoroughly decent human being. So Martijn, I know how busy you are, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Not at all. Thanks, Adrian. Thank you for the kind introduction, potentially slightly exaggerated, but really appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Wonderful, wonderful. So first of all, perhaps we could kick off with you sharing the choices you've made in your payments career.
Yeah, I gave that some thought as well as we chatted about this, Adrian. And I think, to be open, it probably actually starts with rolling into it. So I started my career in consulting. Did different kind of projects, and as these things go when you're junior without too much choice, rolling into a couple of payments projects. So in that sense, the initial choice was probably not a very conscious one, but at the same time stuck around in that. I think stuck around in that because noticing it was a space with a lot of change. Already back then, I've been in sort of more than 15 years now, but back then it was already a high change driver, a lot of regulation already coming in. Within Europe, SEPA programs that were happening. It was a space that was very content driven, especially some other areas I worked in. It's hard to have an impact in payments. It was hard to be respected as a consultant in payments without knowing what you're talking about, which is something that absolutely triggered me as an interesting area. And it's a space with a lot of impact. It's a space. I'm an economist by background, as you know, by degree. There's a space with a lot of impact. There's a space with economic impact, and the less friction we have in payments, the more economic growth that can support. So it's a very impactful space. So I think in that sense, rolling into it very, very consciously staying after that.
Okay.
Did that for quite a while in consulting. So I think the big sort of pivot moment after that came having done that for a good stint, having had the opportunity to build out some of my own advisory team in payments out of Accenture. You hit that bit of, hey, where we're going to really have the impact. You're close to the industry, but you're not in the industry. So that was probably my sort of very conscious trigger to take a step into Mastercard. A very different role than I am in now, more on the operations technology side, integration side, post-merger integration side. But that was a conscious choice. I think in the end, wherever we sit in the industry, your innovation is still being very much driven out of the industry player, the embedded industry players, and the fintechs that come in. And in the end, the innovation drive will come less from the consultants, however facilitating role they can play. So that view, getting a bit closer to the ecosystem, being able to increase the impact, was quite a conscious choice to go into industry and make the switch to Mastercard. And with the opportunities I've had here, I decided to stay there and decided to stay in Gateway for quite a few years. With the opportunity to head up the product team for Gateway.
Excellent. Now you're responsible for products at a Gateway. And one thing I've noticed about you is you're almost unflappable. And there are times when that technology is under stress. Let's just put it like that. And we're coming up to Christmas, and I'm sure merchants' uptime is going to be absolutely critical, particularly on certain days. Yet you seem to have this calmness in a high pressure situation. And I wouldn't say you run towards a fire because you're not a fireman, but you almost sort of seem to anticipate that before it happens. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that, because that's quite a rare skill.
Well, you're right on the shopping peaks, and not just heading towards Christmas, by the way, Adrian. We're recording this on 11/11, which is Singles Day in large parts of Southeast Asia, and actually it's where we often see larger peaks on our infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
On Black Friday. So even as we speak, it's very applicable. But I think it even plays to one of the sort of fun contradictions in payments as well, in the sense of everyone wants and expects it to go as smooth as possible, as frictionless as possible, not notice a payment. Yet we also all want it to be secure, and we all want it to be quick. There's contradictions come into to that, which is logical, because people don't want anything to go wrong with their money. So I think there's an intrinsic play that comes in. I mean, my approach to it, it's one of these ones I think you sometimes learn your strengths just by doing, not by proactively jumping in. So some of it, I'm sure, has to do with my personality, as well as some of the learned behaviors. But I think I'll share a couple of observations of how that plays. I think first one is, remain calm yourself. It might sound a bit like a no-brainer, but having a leader in the team, having a leader in change management, having a leader in product, where my role now, it's quite important to, whether it's an operational stress situation or whether it's a regulatory stress situation, to actually make sure you are remaining calm and make sure facilitate that, in the sense that the pressure is real and my stress levels are going up, that you don't vent or radiate that to a full team, that you've got your sparring partners to be able to do that with. Because if leaders aren't calm, it's hard for a larger team to remain calm in that environment as well. I think a second one is, which I see a lot of organizations I think struggle with also in my consulting days, is high energy, panic, many emails, instant responses, urgent late night calls, you name it, often get confused with a sense of urgency. Okay. And it's the sense of urgency is critical in these situations, but a sense of urgency does not need to mean all running around. A sense of urgency also still means that we're able to keep calm and deliver. And I think it can be tempting. Execs, senior executives and escalations often get involved with that context logically, because they get involved with customer impact, they get involved with regulatory impact, and initially don't have a context of a situation, which means that we've got to quickly qualify impact, we've got to quickly understand what's going on. But that's primarily to make sure you don't get a reactive, panicky type response, which can be tempting. It can be tempting for people to feel more comfortable when they see everyone running around, versus having the calm and making sure we're actually reflecting a control situation. And a controlled sense of urgency is what's needed. Another one there that plays in, which I think is interesting to see as I've grown through my career and taken different roles. There's moments to step into your responsibilities as leaders, and there's moments to step away from your responsibilities as a leader. And often we very much work to empower our teams, give freedom, making sure people are able to make their own mistakes and learn through those. But that's not applicable to every situation. If we're in a higher stress situation, that might not be the moment to take those kind of steps and actually lean in more, narrow some of the boundaries the team has, and not as a negative, not to empower, but more as actually to enable and empower within those boundaries. So I do find myself in different situations either leading in a lot more directly into a team, versus stepping away when that's needed as well. I think where that's so important is that you can, if you only manage by crisis or only manage by urgent event, then you actually step away. You never get to take the step of how do we build a broader team? How do we do things right? Sometimes we need to make short-term decisions that are not the right long-term one, but we can't only make short-term decisions that are not the right long-term one. And that's not just on the content, but on people development, things like that. So I think that's an important one to know when to lean in and out. And as a last one, before I take too much time here on this one, making sure no individual ever feels exposed. I think when stress goes up, for whatever reason, operational stress or when content stress, things like that, it's very important for people to know that they're not as an individual going to be exposed. We come together as a group, we own things as a group, and that's not outside the team, it's also inside the team. We're there as a team at that point, and that team isn't people who work in my organization. That team is people who support the business end to end. Because I think when people start feeling exposed in a stress situation, you're going to trigger individual stress responses with people, which isn't the case. So I think that safe environment, leaning in at the right time, is important to keep the team working in those moments.
Wow. That's a beautiful segue to my next question. I can't believe you've taken me here, because it's one of the things I've observed with you as a leader is you're committed to lead with decency. And so where can you tell that's come from, in terms of overcoming the prevailing leading only with task completion? I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that.
It's a hard one. First of all, I think it's one which I appreciate you indicating that, saying that. It's one, you can't always judge by yourself. You have to judge through others and how they are reflecting. But it's probably also one, looking back to earlier in my career and some of the things I learned there, I probably learned from quite a practical reason as well, and not just from a sort of principled value reason. And to use a literal example, some of the personality downsides I have operating in this space is, and some of them you probably know, Adrian, my attention span is quite limited.
Surely not.
Yes, exactly. I'm impressed you're planning this podcast to be so long. That's part of that. I enjoy juggling multiple things in my head, not one. And put me on one objective, one target, I'll be significantly less productive than you put me at a couple at once. Thinking out loud. One of the things I noticed during COVID as well, do not run on my first idea. I say out loud. It's usually meant to trigger a thought process, need sparring partners to think. But these are things I had early on. These are more personality traits. But interestingly, to be successful in the space I was in, that meant from very early on I had to build very diverse teams. It was very natural to build very diverse teams to be able to get things done, to make sure as a team we're also always complementing each other. I'm not saying that probably is a bit of a value driver within that as well, but it was also very much just a very logical, direct need thing. So what I mean with that also is that then thereby you see early on in your career what value that actually brings. The fact that you can deliver more when you've got a diverse team, whether it's from backgrounds, whether it's education, whether it's cultures, whether it's whatever it is, needing a different way, needing a different perspective early on. So I think I learned that very early on. That probably plays as well with another personal side. I enjoy working with different cultures. I enjoy working internationally. Didn't mention that in the first question, but maybe a reason stuff around the payments as well. It's a very international environment. So that intrinsic nature, again, lets me seek out, whether it's part of a leadership development or purely part of a person, making sure you work in different ways and making sure you challenge in different ways that comes in. And I think lastly, that got sort of reinforced that as you work in program management, like I've done, as you start working with these teams, you start seeing that, the how will drive a lot more value than focusing on the what. The what can drive a lot of value, come out of project management, and you can get through a crisis very quickly and very well, focusing only on the what. But the biggest downside is you can only do that once, and it's a non-repeatable event unless you take the exact same team again with the exact same process and exact control. Whereas focusing on the how makes it something repeatable. Now, something how makes it something scalable. It's not just me changing the way of working in my direct area; it's impacting the way of working in a broader organization. So actually seeing that it's seeing that impact and seeing that way to drive that sort of reinforce the behavior. Maybe I'm steering it very much away from values, which is probably unfair rating. I think that does link back into values, but I think I've probably learned these a bit earlier on.
Okay.
Because I've hit these things and the opportunities and seeing that and the environment I had, seeing the benefit of focusing on a how versus focusing on what's within that as well.
It's interesting. One of your my favorite analogies that you use is going on a train, and actually, if the leader's right, yep. Is it okay to share this? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if the leader's right and he's got all his team on the train, he or she has got all his team on the train, but continues to be right, etc., and reach the destination, i.e. the end of the program or etc., yet they're stood on the station on their own. Well, you might have been right, but Jesus, that's not good leadership if everybody's got off or jumped off, not even on valid stations. I love that analogy, and I suppose that's just what you described there about it's practical, yet if it matters.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think maybe building on your the train analogy.
It's your train analogy.
I've very much used that, and indeed in the delivery space, and how to get things done and have an impact on change. But that goes to the next step as well, as we change roles and have sometimes more impactful roles, in the sense of actually using who's on the train to determine where the train's going to be going, and taking that influence, because the destination may actually need to evolve over time or as we learn, and indeed the next step being sort of not even defining that station that well, defining the direction well, and letting the team define the station we go to. But you're absolutely right. I think it can be very tempting for people, especially as they start growing in career, having a high impact, being very, very good at what they do, to sometimes arrive at the station alone, and underestimating the lack of impact they've had with that. Because if you would have maybe only met your goal by 80%, but would have had the full team along, the total impact would have been a lot.
Brilliant. Yeah, really good analogy, that one. Yeah, nobody wants to end up on a train station with Billy No Mates today. Let's be honest.
Especially not in Wales, Adrian.
Sorry.
Especially not in Wales.
Definitely not. They've always got mates in Wales. That's easy. Always got mates in Wales. And so, far too sociable there. So, what opportunities really excite you the most in the payments industry? Because there's, what's capturing your? Because we hear, there's almost a new technology almost every day that's in my feed anyway.
It's really a really hard question to answer. We chat again next week. I might give you a different answer in that sense as well. But I think what I really enjoy about payments, and what's interesting to see where we are now, is that I mentioned the contradiction of, hey, a consumer wants it to be fast and seamless and gets annoyed if it isn't, and at the same time needs it to be really secure and needs it to be stable and 100% uptime, and you name it. So those kind of intrinsic contradictions, I think are good to see. The other one I do see there is that we've had a lot of amazing technological developments over the last decades and decades. Just even in the basics sort of SWIFT and account to account and original card networks, what that actually enabled. I have the luxury of quite a lot of travel in my job, seeing many different countries, yet I carry no cash whatsoever for any of these and are able to seamlessly move between all these markets. And we find that completely normal, but that is actually, there's quite a lot happening in the background to make that happen. So that's sort of positive, but then at the same time, maybe also driven when you talk to non-industry players or friends and family. Believe me, I get many why questions on why things don't work or aren't able to work, but also many why questions that are actually quite hard to answer, which makes it sometimes more painful. And getting that outside into you see that in the fintech space as well, how many fintechs are evolving, but many fintechs are evolving, having a great impact, because they are jumping on frictions, because they are jumping on issues we still have in the ecosystem. So I think that again, that contradiction of having such an amazing base, but at the same time, still really not actually meeting the consumer need in the full end-to-end perspective, makes it that exciting a space. So I think I will pick one, but I'll start with two. I think one is looking at sort of account-to-account spaces, the real-time account-to-account systems in countries have started to proliferate, have really become the base and norm. That can start moving into a cross-border space and really change a lot in the base payment infrastructure, B2B, in B2C and C2B, where we still see most of the volume realistically compared to cards and other areas. So that's, I think, going to have a big macro impact. But then narrowing more to the world I'm in and operating on the consumer side and consumer friction, I think we're moving towards, but I won't predict a tipping point because I'll be proven wrong when I predict a tipping point. But we are approaching a point where there's so many things coming together from a technology example. And we historically think differently about e-commerce and card present and payment. And in-store has had high thresholds and been quite expensive for shops to be able to support, and the devices. Consumers have found it normal that a payment experience is separate, that you have to check out, you have to stand in the line, or you have a separate payment checkout, versus is that actually the real expectation? And it isn't. Me getting in my ride share somewhere around the world, there is no payment experience. I get in and I get out, and that happens. Consistency in checkout being wanted in store and online. Yeah, those things are all starting to converge. And technologically, we're able to facilitate some of that with tap on phone type technology, where it's becoming easier and cheaper to offer acceptance. So I think for me, if you look at what's happening there in the fintech space so rapidly, what's happening out of the larger established payment companies facilitating these kind of developments, I think there will be a tipping point where we really do see the checkout experience change, and as a contradiction, almost have the payment element disappear out of the checkout, but in a way that it gets focused more on the value it's driving, the value-added services that come on top of that, and removing the actual payment part of the checkout to be genuinely quite frictionless for consumers, and the checkout itself being more the experience that has to be very positive and blended. And I do think we'll see, individually, there's quite a few changes there already in the market, and we all experience them when we go into a smaller coffee shop and they're running a more modern technology, or some of the web shops or the large international brands where you don't have to stand in line. You can pay with every employee that's helped you in the store.
Sure. Yeah.
Because they're able to do it on the device. I think those are individually nice experiences, but are not going to shift the needle until they come together. And I think that's the moment, out of my role in Gateway, we're not just closely watching, we're trying to help and drive that innovation with our technology. I think that's the one I would pick, the consumer side, taking the next level and removing friction for consumers in payments.
Well, I look forward to that one. I'm with you completely. As somebody who travels quite a lot, actually, I took some cash to a country recently, and it stayed there all the time until I come back. It didn't move. But that checkout experience, long may that take some more friction out of that.
Yeah.
So moving towards to you becoming an authentic leader, who has been most influential on that front for you?
It's a bit of an unfair question, I think, Adrian. I think it's hard to pinpoint individuals in that as well, pull that out. But it's and a hard question. I think I do see a couple of distinct phases in my own.
So there's loads of easy questions later, but I thought I wouldn't give them to you.
Yeah, exactly. Get it in. Exactly. But I think I do see a couple of distinct phases in my career, which absolutely have evolved through because of the support I've had. I mean, initially it was very content driven, and I think operating in an environment like consulting was good for me, challenged me. It's an environment where, from a content perspective, there's always tension on the bow. It's never lets go. You never get asked to deliver 100%. It has to be more. But at the same time, the tension is also managed to not break the bow. So it keeps the learning curve steep on that side. And then you start sort of within that. I think I've had people I've worked with closely in my consulting career, both customers as well as leaders with Accenture, that sort of pushed me into doing that through teams, through larger teams, larger delivery constructs. But that actually, like some of the examples I mentioned earlier, that really led to also me being able to focus on my strengths within that, because building the team was actually building our team holistically, and some of the weaknesses I may have, I wasn't focusing on anymore, because we're building that as a group, and thereby able to double down on my strengths and have the larger impact, the larger content impact. So I think that was sort of the first shift which I've seen. The more latter shift, which I've done over the last couple of years, and I think you've been on part of this journey with me as well, Adrian, as has been in Gateway, is actually a step towards considering that as a leader and considering my role more actively as a leader. I think that in itself, a couple of years ago, I probably wouldn't have described myself that way.
Okay.
Whether I operated that way or didn't operate that way, I was doing that more with maybe slightly more tactical mindset, or slightly more selfish mindset. I'm not sure what the best way to put it is, versus actually looking at how you can have a broader impact and being driven to think on the impact I'm having, not just on my direct reports or my broader team or things like that, but thinking on the impact I'm having in an organization. Think on the impact I'm having when I'm operating with different partners in the ecosystem or customers or things like that, and seeing that effectively all of us have a large role as leaders, and moving away from leadership being a hierarchical thing or being a team thing into actually being how do we shift ways of working, thinking. So I think that's been what I've seen over the last couple of years as I've worked and taken my role, the head of product and Gateway. I think that was the shift I had to do. It was closely supported by leadership there. I think that's the bit where I think I've had a high degree of self-motivation on individual work items, but I've certainly needed leaders to help me shift my mindset or shift the pattern of working, which also means, I think that's maybe where I'm conscious of as a leader myself now, that I'm very conscious if I wouldn't have had that support, I wouldn't be where I am, and I wouldn't have taken those steps myself without these people trusting me. And I think quite a few of them, by the way, I'm saying this with reflection, Adrian, a few of these I might not have recognized that back in the day when I'm thinking back on observations. I'm not guaranteeing that 15 years ago when I had some feedback that I find valuable now, I found it valuable 15 years ago. But I think that does come in there. But it shows that they were doing that for a reason, and they were doing that even though I probably wasn't always amused at being pushed a certain direction. I thought, why am I being pushed that direction? That is a leader caring about a broader development and able to do the right thing by people, even if people don't always are not in that mindset yet or able to operate.
Brilliant. Now, it's fascinating, and I've heard that from so many overachieving leaders, is the fact that they wouldn't be where they are today unless they'd had great people around them at certain points to nudge in that direction. So sort of final question really is, what do you wish you knew earlier on in your life that you know today?
It's a hard one. That's quite a few. Building them up. Thankfully, it's we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, so that's good. One of them actually interesting to link it to the previous one. I think one of it is actually that feedback point, in the sense of being a bit more open to some of the feedback points, thinking beyond direct role when you were your initial narrower roles in the early steps of your career. Be making sure that even if you don't agree with feedback or don't completely understand the feedback, with hindsight, I would have probably spent a bit more time understanding the context of the feedback, and even if I wasn't agreeing, seeing what the driver was and the value was. Because, like I said, looking back at that, most of them absolutely ended up making sense, even if it didn't on the day itself. But maybe a larger, more recent one linked to the leadership step I mentioned of more explicitly taking a broader role, is learning from people's strengths. I think it's not focusing on strengths, even when you're working with someone who maybe doesn't have the same values match, or you struggle to work with, and we all hit situations like that, where either a leader you struggle to work with, or a peer, or a partner, or a customer, can be all because you have a different way of working, because you have a value mismatch, because there are certain things really not going well. And all the situations actually focus on the positives that these people are driving and these leaders are driving, because there's rarely anyone I've come across that doesn't in the end actually have a whole bunch of strengths. And taking the shift of, even when you're having negative experiences, continuing to operate with assuming the right intent. And it's taken a bit of maturity learning for me, Adrian, to do that, believe me, but being able to say, even when you're theoretically being proven the right intent maybe isn't there, you think that's the case, operate on the right intent, but not because it's fair or this, but doing that because that's actually the best thing to do for yourself and your own development. If you continue to operate with the right intent, assuming the right intent of individuals, it allows you to focus on the strengths and what they do bring. And I think that's something, if I would have started doing that earlier on in my career, I think I would be able to make some of the steps I've recently done earlier. And I would have had a larger impact as well. I think there's a lot we can learn from, actually saying it now out loud, there's probably more we can learn from people that you can sometimes have friction with and challenge with than not. So I think that's probably the biggest one. Others, there's a personal work life piece there as well. I mean, I don't blend personal work lives that much, so it's maybe a weird one for me to mention. But at the same time, I used to, maybe mentioning it, like, I don't blend my work and my professional lives that much from a life and social life perspective. But thereby, because I've not intrinsically done that, the lives can stay quite separate. But actually realizing that for individuals, whether you blend those or not, for individuals, you are one individual. Whatever theory there is around work persona or home persona or whatever, people are an individual. things interact, and personal lives have an impact on how people operate and vice versa, and things like that. And actually realizing that, and again, maybe even links to the previous point on, working with people, or being conscious that how you lead at work has an impact on a personal side, but also the other way around, that things happening in personal circumstances have an impact. And making it sound like in negative situations now, I don't mean it that way, but more approaching people in that holistic sense.
Sure.
Is something that I also probably learned later on, partially because I'd be quite comfortable having separate lives, and I'm still comfortable with that. But it doesn't change that actually we're always taking our whole self to work. You don't take part of yourself to work, and we spend a lot of hours at work. So that holistic side is I think that's come in. Might throw a last one in there, maybe a softer one or a stranger one, but I think I've been, and we have actually previously talked about this as well, quite risk averse in many ways, not because when I've been comfortable to do things, I'm happy to do a stretch. But also mean risk averse in the sense of, I've been waiting on data points before taking a next step, or versus actually, I think I can do about half a data point I can do so let's go try A, or aim a bit higher, and we can always end up differently. And I think, and that's something also, all of these I try and take into how I lead now, but that's also one specific I try and lead into my teams now, of making sure there's a culture where we can take risks, making sure there's a culture where we can learn through mistakes, because I think that's another one where the earlier you actually realize that that you're going to learn from these things, like taking the trend of the things I've said, the earlier you can realize you can learn from people that you might have the best interaction with, the earlier you realize you can learn from mistakes you're making. And no one likes that. So no one intrinsically, whatever management books we read, I don't believe that anyone intrinsically enjoys making a mistake or not being popular or you name it. But thereby, the earlier you realize that that's actually going to lead to better results and more impact and more personal development and more ability for people to operate in their own leadership roles. I think that would probably be the biggest one I would.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Martin, for sharing all this wisdom. I think there's I normally try and sort of summarize this down to about 3 or 4 points, but there's I've got about 10 or 12 here. But if I just could sort of 80-20 it for me, I think the first piece for me was sort of remain calm in yourself, and that control sense of urgency. I think that could help a lot of leaders and a lot of people as part of teams. That's really stood out for me, and I think again one of your shining qualities. I think the train analogy we used of actually, even if it's directional, we don't always know the journey, particularly in technology, that can happen. But actually, as the leader, it's not about being right. It's actually about going on that journey, keeping people together. Because if you want to have impact, then you're going to need to be involved in a team. And it's going to, in a global business, it's going to be a diverse team. And therefore, we're going to need to encourage and not point fingers. So I think that's a real key one there. And actually, a very practical perspective, if you want to actually have more impact, then it makes sense to have diverse teams. I think then as well, just that other piece then is just about understanding the context quite often, but both within a feedback perspective for yourself and also when managing upwards, bringing other leaders, whether it's an escalation or whatever it may be, to actually say, this is the context. And nobody meant to mess up, as you say, nobody actually likes making mistakes from that perspective. I think the final one for me that really stood out was try and realize most people have a positive intent. They are trying to come to work. They are bringing themselves. They are trying to do the best they can do. So, and they're running the team for a reason. What do they bring? And by definition, their value set is probably going to be slightly different to yours because we're all humans. So they're the key ones I've captured away that I think would certainly resonate with me the most. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. And thank you for the good summary there, Adrian. We could have kept this a bit shorter if we would have started with
Sorry?
that. We could have kept this a bit shorter if it would have started with the with the concise summary.
Not between you and I, Martin. That's a record for us. This is a record, dear me.
No, but I think you've pulled out key ones there. I agree. And then it also shows that, there's some methods to your madness, and the questions, and they do actually link. It's not
thanks a mil.
not completely independent. And in the end, indeed, that we lead best through being ourselves and not being different.
I think that's a beautiful place to end, because I think that's the final words there. But on that front. So thank you so much again, and I really appreciate it.
Perfect.
Take care.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
Take care.